Today I'm going to be sharing with you my best watercolor pencil tips, as well as sharing how I was able to create this botanical flower painting. Now, normally when I'm using watercolor pencils, I like to use a smoother paper. But for this picture, I decided to go ahead and use a cold pressed paper, which has a lot more tooth to it than your normal smooth paper. Now, as you see, I'm gently laying down the pencil here, and I never push more than I need to get the pencil to lay down, but this pencil grips right to this paper because it is a lot more toothy. Now, the paper that I'm using here is the Medine cold pressed paper, and I really like this paper for your traditional watercolors, but I wanted to see what I'd be able to achieve using watercolor pencils on this. You're going to notice right away how vibrant these pencils blended out on this paper. Now, normally on my traditional hot pressed paper that I would use, I would have to build up a couple of layers, or sometimes I've even gone in with watercolors as the base layer for the background and then gone in with some watercolor pencils on top of that. But for this background, one layer was just enough. Now, I was experimenting with different ways to blend this out, and usually I use a watercolor brush that has water in it, but I decided to go with just a traditional watercolor brush here, and I was playing around with different amounts of water on the brush, and I figured out that the least amount of water on the brush blended the pencils and gave them more vibrancy. So you're going to see I just go over sort of the left half of this picture here because that's where I used more water, and the second half that I blended out I used less water, and I liked that effect a lot more. Now, I wanted to keep a looser look in the background anyway, so I really like the mix of the greens that I got, and it's going to give me some nice contrast against the brighter colors and the oranges and reds in the flower. Now, when you're doing a flower like this or any botanical illustrations, when you've got so many colors that are similar and petals that are going in all different shapes and sizes and different directions, it can be easy to lose your place. So what I'm doing is systematically choosing which petals that I want to focus on first here. So I'm choosing the outer petals. So I'm going to put all the colors in there, and when I'm using mostly any type of medium, whether it be watercolor pencils, colored pencils, watercolor, I usually go from light to dark because it's always easier to darken up an area, but once you get that area too dark, it's hard to get it light again. So I usually always start with my lightest color, and then I'm just laying the other colors down, and I want this to be a pretty bright and vibrant flower like in the reference photo, so I'm choosing bright and vibrant colors. Now, the real-time version of this is available over on my Patreon, as well as a new video each week. I'll go ahead and link that down below in the description. In my Patreon tutorials, you not only get the reference, line art, and all of the colors and supplies I'm using, but I also explain why I'm doing everything and why I'm choosing colors, and I give you alternatives, not just what color it is, but I'm also going to tell you if it's a warm red or a cool red or a pinky red or an orangey red, so that if you don't have the exact same supplies that I'm using, you can find something in your stash that's close enough and still be able to follow along. Now, another tip I have for these watercolor pencils, when you go to blend them out, I find using less water is best, especially if you're trying to keep it more controlled and in smaller areas. Like, I don't want the colors of the petals to bleed all over the place. Now, if you're going for that look, that's totally fine. But in this flower illustration here, I wanted a little bit more control over the color placement. So I'm choosing to use my water brush here. And the brushes that I use have really great water control, so the water doesn't come out of it sporadically. Now, you could do the same thing here like I did in the background and just be very careful with your water control and dabbing it off onto a paper towel. But I find blending out watercolor pencils with the least amount of water gives the best result, and as you can see, just with a little pass of water, these pencils blend out so smoothly and they just become so vibrant. Now, after I've got the outer petals all blocked in and blended out, I'm starting to work on the inner petals. And because I was pretty good with my water control, I haven't even gone ahead and dried those petals. I'm just going to let them dry as I'm working, and I'm just being very careful not to lay my hand and smudge that color around. Now, I always like to use the least amount of pencils possible when I'm working, and I'll try to combine pencils together to get a different color instead of using so many colors, because it just makes it a lot easier and you don't lose track of what pencils or what colors you're using. So you'll see me use a lot of the same colors over and over, and I just sort of layer them to get different looks and blend them out together. Now these are the Faber Castell Albrecht watercolor pencils, and these pencils have been my absolute favorite watercolor pencils by far in years. They layer so nicely, they blend so nicely. You can get anywhere from a nice crisp sharp look like you would with colored pencils if you keep layering it up, or if you just do a layer or two like I did here with this flower, you can get a really nice watercolory type look. If you want a more looser, flowy kind of style, very painterly, these pencils are just so versatile. I absolutely love them. Now, another tip that I have with watercolor pencils, and this might be more specific to these exact pencils, is once I lay them down and blend them out with water, I find that they're a little more permanent than your traditional watercolors or other watercolor pencils that I've tried. Meaning I can go on top of them and layer up again, and when I blend that layer out, it's not going to blend the layer below it very easily. So these pencils are great if you want to go over top and glaze other colors over top, or if you want to darken up areas but you don't want all the colors to sort of smudge together. These just layer and blend so beautifully. I just can't say enough good things about them. Now, once I've got all of my base layers down on this rose, I'm just going back and I'm looking at my darkest areas and see what areas I need to make darker to make other petals pop. So for instance, the shadows underneath of petals, or where a petal is folding a little bit, I'm going to put a little bit more dark color in there just to create some depth and dimension. And I also want to make sure that the inner petals along the edges I'm keeping a little bit darker so that those nice bright center petals really pop. And I don't want to put too many layers or too much detail into this because I really want to keep that painterly look. And I don't like how the stem blended out the first time, so you will see me go back in there and make some changes. And then at the very end, just for some last minute touches, I'm taking the Albrecht white pencil, my Polychromos white pencil, and my Prismacolor white pencil. And I'm just testing all three to see which one shows up better, if I want to make some little white highlights on top, or if I want to use my Polychromos pencil to sort of layer over top and slightly lighten an area, which I really like to use the Polychromos for because it is a very translucent white. It won't go super opaque over areas, so you can use it to really just glaze over and tone down an area a little bit. And then I just do any last minute blending or any last minute touch-ups. If you enjoyed this, then be sure to like the video, subscribe, hit that notification bell so you're notified when I post my videos. And thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!